Hi everybody, this is Angus Campbell. It's been a little while since I've posted anything, but we're getting on into into 2019 now, and after a few minor health ailments, want to get back on track and begin progressing some of the restorations on the go, and also bring you up to speed with some of the history of some of the bikes that I've got in my Parsec collection. And today I've decided to focus upon the BSA E35 SS, Fury SS, which is on the bench behind me, behind the Bandit there. So let's get stuck in, and I'll try and link together the history of the Fury SS, the Bandit, and also the Show Fury, which is hidden behind there as well, lurking behind the SS on the bench at the moment. I'll try and link those three together and give the story of how they've all come about over the last frighteningly 26 years, I think it is. So let's get cracking. So let's begin the story. So my fascination with primarily BSA Furies began in the mid-70s, when there was an article in Motorcycle News that focused upon a BSA Fury that was on display at Vale Onslow Motorcycles in Birmingham. And that article went into a little bit about the history of the bike and how it came to be at Vale Onslow, but more importantly described the fact that for the right price then Vale Onslows might consider parting with the machine. So I at the time contacted them in the late 70s and put an offer in on the machine, but they stated that because they'd had so much interest in it that they'd decided to keep it. And so nothing more was said or considered for quite a period of time, until the late 80s, when I belonged to a classic British motorcycle club here in Market Harborough, that included as one of its members Owen Wright, who authored a book about BSAs at the time, and that book includes a photo that he secured himself of the same BSA Fury still on display at Vale Onslows in the late 80s, early 90s. So that sparked my interest again in Furies, and I went over to Vale Onslow in 1991 to take some of my own photos of that machine. Got talking to the proprietor at the time that run the shop, one of the three brothers, Peter Vale Onslow, and tentatively approached the subject of any interest in then selling it to me. And at the time he didn't commit to that, although he did say that if I left my telephone number, then him and his two brothers might consider it and get back to me and contact me again. Well, I never expected to hear anything more about it, but 2 weeks later I got a call from Peter Vale Onslow stating that they would consider selling me the bike, but for a sum of money that was a little larger than I originally intended. But that was because they wanted to to arrive at a sum that could be equally split 3 ways. And there was one of the brothers wanted to invest his part of the money into building a new concrete garage or some such story anyway. So that's how they arrived at a certain price. Anyway, I did get the money together, and I went over in a van and collected the bike, purchased it, and this is the bike that you see here now, which is the Show Fury that was built for the 1970 launch of the 71 power set, which took place at the Royal Lancaster Hotel in November 1970. This bike has no engine internals. It looks complete. It has obviously a lot of the major engine components that are pretty scarce, but actually there are no internals at all. So no crank cams, pistons, rods, primary drive, gearbox. It's empty. Primary drive isn't too much of a problem because it's common with the B25 of that year as well, so that's easy enough. But the rest of it obviously is unique to the Fury. But in line with a couple of other people interested in these bikes over a period of time, then the intent was to try and scour the earth through various contacts to see if parts could be assembled to make this into a running machine. To take what is currently a gutless engine out and to collect the parts to build this up into a running machine. And that process began from 1991 when I purchased it over a number of years, put feelers out, made contact with various people, got 1 or 2 bits and pieces through basically advertising the requirement through local magazines. I think British Bike magazine at the time in the 90s, late 90s, were good enough to post a small article on this just to promote what I was trying to do. But then what happened was that I got notified by a friend of mine who has a Fury and also had a half-built Triumph Bandit, that he'd learned to the fact that another person who'd collected Fury parts over a number of years wanted to sell up and would never be in a position to build up a bike, and therefore decided to sell what parts he'd accumulated. And so I went to see that gentleman, and it was apparent that he'd collected more than enough parts to build up a complete Fury with some parts to spare. So with that, and being in a position to acquire those parts, which I did, and at the same time colluding with the friend of mine who had a half-built Triumph Bandit, but also some spares, then a plan was hatched whereby I would begin to build up at some point, or ensure that sufficient parts were assembled to build a separate Fury SS, separate to this Fury Roadster. But at the same time as well, I would restore / complete the build of my friend's Triumph Bandit SS, and in return we would actually pull the parts that we had to both finish this Bandit and also build a separate machine from scratch, and that's where we're at the moment. So in 2003, I think it was, then I collected an incomplete Triumph Bandit and spare parts from from my friend. Just prior to that, I collected the parts that I'd purchased from this other source, and I began from then on in restoring stroke building firstly this Bandit SS, which was completed, it took 10 years, but it was completed in 2013. And where necessary, we took parts from the Show Fury, some cycle parts like the odd engine plates, chain guard, certain cycle parts for the rolling chassis that were pretty scarce, and got patterns made up to both complete the Bandit here, but also to put additional parts to put side to build up a Fury SS. So where we're at the moment is the Bandit SS was finished in 2013 and also was displayed at the Stafford show in April 2014, I think it was 2014 or 2015. You will have seen it there with the Show Fury, which was there at the same time for a comparison. And you'll also see the very first video that I posted on YouTube under my channel, which is showing this very bike running with no commentary, etc., and very raw, but at least it's showing it as a running machine. And from then on, we were able to concentrate on putting the Fury SS together, the parts of which had begun to restore and prepare in parallel with building up the Bandit. So getting this rolling chassis together was quite a quick job following the completion of the Bandit. So you can see that the rolling chassis of the SS is complete. The paint job was done at a Motor Factors locally. Same ones that actually have recently painted up my A70L parts that you can see in a separate video. They've done a super job and obviously matched it to the Show Fury, which is original and unrestored. But having been indoors all its life, the paint hasn't faded in the same way that all the paint colours at the time did to a greater extent. So the other colours, this is Plum Crazy, of course, for the Fury. The other colours for the other bikes, Sterling Moss, Etruscan Bronze, Flamboyant Red, all faded very, 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 very badly in sunlight. However, the paint on the Show Fury has lasted very well because it's not seen a lot of ultraviolet light in its life. So the plans now are that the Show Fury will remain as is, a piece of history, original and unrestored, and the Fury SS will be made into a runner. But aha, you'll say, there's a damn great hole in the frame where the engine should be. Well, with the help of a very capable engineer friend, then we 2 years ago we began the work on the motor, and in autumn last year I collected this, and most of it is in this container here, and I will post some videos as we begin to undertake a final build on this. But basically at the moment we've got a complete motor there with roughly in its first, if you like, assembly, but there is some additional work yet to do on the cylinder head. So there's the domes, cylinder head domes to machine, and also the valve buckets and the valve guide and assemblies to machine as well. So a little bit of work left to do on the motor, but not much before we can then disassemble and begin the final assembly. What I've been doing recently is just doing a bit of lining up work on the gearbox side of things, but preparations are well underway really to get this completed, and then to pop it into the rolling chassis. And the target that I've set myself really is that well, it's now early March 2019. We're not going to get this to the Stafford show this year, but it'd be nice to get it to the Stafford show in 2020. So that'll be a good target. And then, as you've seen from other videos, I am in the process as well of doing a bit more of a straightforward restoration on an A70L 750 Lightning, and it would be nice to get that at the 2020 Stafford show in April 2020 at the same time. So that's where we are, and that's gives you a bit of background then to the SS and how that's linked to the Bandit and to the Show Fury in the back there. And the reason the Bandit's here at the moment is because the owners lent it back to me, so we can actually take one or two parts of it, namely the auto advance unit, to get a pattern made up. So we're just looking after it at the moment, taking one or two bits off it to measure up, and then we'll be returning it to the owner. So that gives you a bit of background. What I'll do now is get back into the house, and I'll just go through a number of static photos that I have of me collecting one or two parts on the way over the last few years, just to try and link a bit of a timeline together. But I don't have much of documentary evidence, but at least it'll give you a flavour of that. So there we are. That's the E35 SS, which we'll plough on with this year in tandem with the A70 Lightning, but also at the same time not forgetting that we'll be actually riding the main road machine, which is the A75V Rocket 3. So just to finish this introduction off, then I've managed to dig out a few digital photos that I took originally before I started the build. The first one here shows all the accumulated parts stored in one location in the garage. However, this was after a little while, because as you can see, I've already had some of the parts, namely the frame, Dove grey powder coated, and also the wheels have already been built up as well. So this was probably actually a few years, believe it or not, into the project, because I do remember at the time that in addition to taking in parts to actually Burton Bite bits to be Dove grey powder coated, I also requested one or two parts to be built up from patterns, and the one that I remember most vividly was the battery carrier, which is unique to the Fury. And for various reasons with respect to certain fabricators, then that work actually ended up taking a couple of years or so. One of the reasons being that I wasn't really pressing for it in a timely manner, to be honest. But secondly, because the work was fairly low priority with one-offs, etc., with the fabricator. But anyway, ultimately we got it done, and therefore we were able to put the newly painted and rebuilt parts together with the rest of the stash, which you can see here, all shelved up. Here we can see a bit of a closer picture of the frame itself, bog standard. This is actually a Mark II version of the frame, and the reason you can tell that is because the frame was slightly modified at the steering head fairly late on in the development before the first road going tests, with quite a large triangular gusset on both sides of the steering head, which you can see clearly in this photograph. In these next two photographs, you can see that I've purchased a new old stock complete assembly, and here it's under wax paper wrappings, but it's an all original front end new old stock that I purchased from a supplier in America. And the reason being that although I did secure one or two separate bits and pieces with respect to the main stash, I didn't have any original steering yokes, and this came to light complete, so I purchased it and swapped out the stanchions and the springs because they are shorter on the Fury than these, which I think originally were built for A65. Moving on to the crankcases. This is the left-hand crankcase half, which has been almost completely machined. There are one or two bits and pieces that need tidying up on it, but in general it's been completely machined. And I had actually two or three copies of this. However, with respect to the right-hand crankcase half shown here, then this is a total blank, and therefore requires machining from scratch using drawings and a mating datum surface, which could be provided by obviously the left-hand crankcase half, with this being machined and a crank being able to be set up within that. Then that gives you a datum point to match the two halves together. And this is what's already been completed in the first assembly build of the engine that you saw in the parts box a little bit earlier in the video. Finally, this shows an oil tank that I purchased from Rustler Racing, the proprietor of which is Martin Rustler, who used to work at the BSA factory, and I believe did participate in some testing of the Fury during its development phase. I already did have an oil tank in the main stash, but this is which I still have. But this is actually factory paint in the original Triumph Bandit colours of top half silver, lower half black. And when I was over at Martin Russell's Rustler Racing, arranging for some pattern parts to be made up from parts taken from the temporarily from the show Fury, namely I think it was engine plates and also an air filter top cap, all of which are extremely scarce. Then he mentioned at the time that he did have this oil tank in stock and available, and I purchased it and had this one painted up, and it now resides painted up on the bike, as you saw earlier in the video. So I think that's about it for the time being, everyone, by way of an introduction to the E35 SS Fury SS, and links to the Triumph Bandit SS and my show Fury from Vale Onslow, an original picture of which you see here for the original marketing in '71 with the model Karen Young. So we'll follow the build in future videos of the Fury SS, and hope you've enjoyed this initial intro, although it's been a bit of a talk to you rather than showing too much. I hope that's been interesting and acts as a foundation for future videos. Thanks very much, everybody, for watching, and see you in a future video. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.